The sun blazed mercilessly over Ouagadougou as President Ibrahim Traore stared out the window of his modest office in the presidential palace. At 34 years old, the former military officer still found himself uncomfortable with the trappings of power. The wooden desk before him was cluttered with intelligence reports, economic projections, and security assessments, all competing for his attention. But it was the slim red folder placed directly in front of him that had stolen his focus for the past hour. "Are we certain about this information?" Traore asked, his voice measured despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Colonel Alido Sawadogo, his longtime friend and now head of military intelligence, nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mr. President. 3 separate sources have confirmed it. The Chinese mining company has been extracting gold far beyond their permitted quota and smuggling it out through neighboring Ghana. What's worse, they've been using illegal mercury extraction methods that are poisoning the groundwater in Bobo Dioulasso region." Traore closed the folder and pinched the bridge of his nose. Since taking power in the military transition, he had made the protection of Burkina Faso's natural resources a cornerstone of his leadership philosophy. The country had suffered too long from exploitation by foreign interests. Now, faced with evidence that the Golden Mountain Mining Corporation, a company responsible for thousands of local jobs and significant tax revenue, was systematically looting the nation's wealth while poisoning its people, he felt a familiar anger rising within him. "The evidence is actionable?" he asked. "Beyond doubt," Sawadogo replied. "But, Mr. President, there are complications. Golden Mountain has powerful backers in Beijing. They've invested over $3 billion in our infrastructure projects. The dam at Bagre, the new hospital in Koudougou, the highway to Nigerol depend on their continued funding." Traore stood up and walked to the map of Burkina Faso that dominated the wall of his office. His finger traced the outline of his beloved country, its borders drawn by colonial powers with no regard for tribal territories or natural boundaries. So much of their present trouble could be traced back to those arbitrary lines. "Have you informed anyone else about this?" "Only the 3 of us know. You, me, and Major Sana, who led the investigation." Sawadogo hesitated. "Mr. President, I should also mention that our intelligence suggests foreign interests may be unsettled by your recent policies. The French, particularly." Traore smiled grimly. "When are they not unsettled by an African leader who puts his own people first?" A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Traore's chief of staff, Fatima Ouedraogo, entered with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. President, but the Chinese ambassador is requesting an urgent meeting. He's waiting in the anteroom." Traore exchanged a meaningful glance with Sawadogo. "How convenient. Show him in, Fatima." As his staff left to retrieve the ambassador, Traore turned to Sawadogo. "Not a word about our investigation. Let's hear what he has to say first." Ambassador Wei entered the office with practiced poise, his handshake firm as he greeted both men. At 65, Wei had spent decades navigating African politics and prided himself on his ability to read situations. Something in Traore's expression seemed to give him pause. "Mr. President, Colonel," Wei nodded respectfully. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Of course, Ambassador. What can I do for China today?" Traore gestured to a chair, which Wei took gratefully. "I bring wonderful news," Wei smiled broadly. "Beijing has approved an additional $500 million investment package for Burkina Faso. Roads, schools, a new wing for the Universal interest-free loans with very favorable terms." Traore leaned back in his chair. "That is indeed generous. May I ask what prompted this sudden display of friendship?" If Wei noticed the edge in Traore's voice, he didn't show it. "Our president values the relationship with Burkina Faso tremendously. He sees your leadership as forward-thinking and pragmatic. This is simply a gesture of our commitment to a shared future." "A shared future," Traore repeated. "And would this commitment extend to respecting our sovereignty and natural resources?" A flicker of unease crossed Wei's face. "Of course. China has always maintained a policy of non-interference and mutual respect." Traore opened the red folder and slid it across the desk. Then perhaps you can explain these photographs showing Golden Mountain's illegal mining operations and these water samples from villages showing mercury contamination at 40 times the acceptable level? Wei's face remained impassive, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he closed the folder without examining its contents. There appears to be some misunderstanding, Wei said smoothly. I'm not familiar with the operational details of private companies, but I assure you, if there are concerns, we can establish a joint committee to investigate. I've already conducted my investigation. Traore cut him off. What I need now is for Golden Mountain to cease all operations immediately, compensate the affected communities, and for those responsible to face justice. Wei's diplomatic veneer cracked. Mr. President, with all due respect, you must consider the broader implications. The partnership between our nations has been beneficial for Burkina Faso. It would be unwise to jeopardize that over what may be isolated incidents. Is that a threat, Ambassador? A reality, Mr. President. In this world, small nations must choose their battles carefully. Traore leaned forward. My country may be small, Ambassador Wei, but our sovereignty is not negotiable. You have 48 hours to provide me with a plan to address these violations, or I will nationalize Golden Mountain's assets and present our evidence to international tribunals. Wei stood, his composure regained. You are a young leader, Mr. President. Youth brings courage, but not always wisdom. I urge you to reconsider this approach before actions are taken that cannot be undone. After Wei departed, Sawadogo looked at Traore with concern. You've drawn a line in the sand. Some lines must be drawn, Traore replied, but his mind was already racing through the potential consequences. The Chinese held significant leverage over Burkina Faso's economy. If they decided to retaliate, the impact would be devastating for a nation already struggling with poverty, climate change, and regional instability. Increase security at all key infrastructure sites, Traore ordered, and get me a secure line to President Adesina in Nigeria. We may need regional allies sooner than we thought. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the capital, Traore knew he had initiated a dangerous game. But as he looked at the photographs of children playing near mercury-tainted streams, he felt a certainty that transcended political calculation. Some battles chose you. Part 2. The Betrayal. The next morning, Traore was awakened by an urgent call from Colonel Sawadogo. Mr. President, there's been a leak. Details of our investigation into Golden Mountain are on the front page of L'Observateur. Traore sat up in bed, instantly alert. How much do they know? Everything, sir. The illegal mining, the water contamination, even our ultimatum to Ambassador Wei. They're quoting from documents that only 3 people had access to. A cold realization settled in Traore's stomach. Either Sawadogo himself, Major Sana, or someone had breached his own office security. Given Sawadogo's call, he suspected the latter 2 options. Find Major Sana, now. Within the hour, Traore gathered his security council in the bunker beneath the presidential palace. The atmosphere was tense as ministers and military officials filed in, exchanging nervous glances. Major Sana is missing, Sawadogo reported once everyone was seated. His residence is empty, and he hasn't reported for duty. His wife says he left yesterday evening claiming he was called to an emergency meeting. No such meeting was scheduled, Traore said flatly, scanning the faces around the table. It seems we have a traitor among us. Defense Minister Koulibaly cleared his throat. Mr. President, with respect, perhaps we should consider that Major Sana was acting as a patriot. These revelations have galvanized public opinion against foreign exploitation. The streets are filling with supporters chanting your name. A patriot doesn't leak classified information during a delicate negotiation, Traore replied sharply. He's compromised our position and potentially endangered our national security. Minister of Foreign Affairs Adama Diallo interjected. Speaking of which, the Chinese embassy has requested an immediate call with you. The French ambassador is also demanding a meeting, as is the American chargé d'affaires, end quote. Let them wait, Traore decided. First, we secure our position. Colonel Sawadogo, What's the status of the Golden Mountain facilities? We've established a military perimeter around their main operations. Their executives are effectively contained, though technically not detained. But sir, they've called in their employees. Over 2,000 local workers are gathered outside the gates, concerned about their jobs. Traore nodded grimly. This was the dilemma of leadership in a poor country, balancing immediate economic needs against long-term sovereignty. Every job was a lifeline for an extended family. Minister Ouedraogo. He turned to his economy minister. What would be the immediate economic impact if Golden Mountain ceased operations? The minister, a University of Sorbonne-educated economist, didn't sugarcoat his answer. Devastating in the short term. Beyond the lost jobs, we'd see a 15% drop in foreign exchange earnings. Loan defaults would increase, and the currency would likely devalue by at least 20%. The infrastructure projects currently funded by Chinese loans would stall immediately. And the long-term impact of continued mercury poisoning? Traore challenged. Incalculable, Mr. President. Healthcare costs, lost productivity, agricultural damage, a generation of children with developmental issues. The room fell silent as the stakes became clear to everyone present. A young aide burst into the room without knocking, her face pale. Mr. President, you need to see this. She handed Traore a tablet showing a live stream from an international news network. On screen, Major Sana was giving an interview from what appeared to be a European location. The caption identified him as a Burkina military whistleblower. President Traore's confrontation with China is not about protecting our resources, Sana was saying. It's about redirecting mining contracts to his family members and close associates. I have documented evidence of corruption at the highest levels. Traore's face remained impassive as he passed the tablet around the table. Inside, however, he felt a building fury. The accusation was a complete fabrication, a classic disinformation tactic designed to undermine his moral authority. Paris, Ouedraogo noted, examining the background of the video. He's in France. Of course he is, Traore said bitterly. The former colonial power had never accepted Burkina Faso's pivot away from French influence. His predecessor had been overthrown shortly after suggesting the removal of French military bases. Now Traore himself had accelerated that process, while simultaneously questioning French mining interests. We need to respond immediately, urged the communications minister. Issue a strong denial. Present evidence of the Chinese violations. No, Traore interrupted. That's exactly what they want, to drag us into a public relations battle while the real issue, the poisoning of our people, gets lost in accusations and counter-accusations. He stood up and walked around the table, gathering his thoughts. Here's what we're going to do. First, no direct response to Sana's allegations. Instead, Minister of Health, I want you to hold a press conference at the hospital in Bobo Dioulasso. Show the world the children suffering from mercury poisoning. Minister of Environment, release the full water quality reports from the affected regions raw data that speaks for itself. He turned to his military chiefs. Secure all critical infrastructure against possible sabotage. Double the guard at our dams, power plants, and communications facilities. And Golden Mountain? Asked Ouedraogo. Traore paused, weighing his options. A full nationalization would trigger an international crisis and economic repercussions his people could ill afford. Yet backing down now would signal that Burkina Faso's sovereignty was negotiable. We'll establish a joint control commission, he decided. The company continues to operate, but under direct government oversight. All extraction adheres strictly to environmental regulations, with independent monitors on site. And 60% of profits go directly into a transparent sovereign fund for the Burkina people. The Chinese will never agree, stated Foreign Minister Diallo. Then we seize the assets, Traore said simply. But first, we give them a chance to be reasonable. As the meeting concluded, Traore asked Ouedraogo to remain behind. Once alone, the president's composure briefly faltered. How did we miss this, old friend? Sana was vetted personally by you. Ouedraogo looked pained. He served with distinction in the north against the jihadists. Saved my life twice. I never imagined. The French must have had leverage on him we didn't know about. Traore nodded, understanding the complexities of loyalty in a poor nation where foreign powers could offer life-changing sums to those willing to betray their country. Find his family, Traore said. Not to punish them, to protect them. They're likely victims in this too. As Sawadogo left, Traore's private phonia line known to only his closest confidants buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. The lion who challenges both the dragon and the rooster may find himself without allies when the hyenas circle. Reconsider your path. You have friends who can help you step back gracefully. Traore deleted the message. The metaphor wasn't subtle, casting China as the dragon, France as the Gallic rooster, and unnamed internal enemies as hyenas. The threat was clear, as was the implied offer. Abandon the confrontation and keep his position at the cost of his purpose. He would do neither. Part 3. The Reckoning. 3 days later, Traore stood in the village of Kongusi, watching as health workers in hazmat suits collected water samples from the local well. Around him, villagers gathered, their faces a mixture of worry and hope. Many held up children with visible skin lesions and developmental issues, the human cost of mercurial mining runoff. How long has the water been like this? Traore asked an elderly village chief. The changes came slowly, Mr. President. First, the fish in the river died. Then our cattle began to sicken. Now our children. The old man's voice broke. We complained to local officials, but nothing was done. They said it was natural contamination, not the mine. Traore placed a hand on the chief's shoulder. That ends today. The presidential visit to affected villages had been organized with minimal security and no media presenza, calculated risk. Traore wanted to see the reality without filters, and he wanted the people to see that their president wasn't afraid to walk among them, drink their water, listen to their stories. His phone vibrated with an urgent message from Ouagadougou. Golden Mountain had issued a statement denying all allegations and announcing the immediate suspension of operations due to the hostile business environment. Over 5,000 workers had been laid off with immediate effect. Simultaneously, the Chinese government had suspended all infrastructure loans to Burkina Faso, citing unexpected policy changes that required reevaluation of bilateral commitments. The economic pressure had begun, exactly as expected. As his convoy returned to the capital, Traore received more troubling news. French media outlets were amplifying Major Sana's corruption allegations while questioning Traore's democratic legitimacy. Several Western nations had issued travel advisories for Burkina Faso, citing political instability. Most concerning, intelligence reported unusual movement among jihadist groups near the Mali borderas if they sensed weakness and were preparing to test the government's resolve. Back in Ouagadougou by nightfall, Traore called an emergency broadcast to address the nation. Standing before a simple backdrop of the national flag, he spoke directly to the camera. My fellow Burkinabe, tonight I speak to you not just as your president, but as a son of our soil. For too long, our nation has been treated as nothing more than a source of wealth for others, our minerals extracted, our people exploited, our environment destroyed. When we dare to question this arrangement, we face economic threats, political destabilization, and lies designed to divide us. He held up a vial of contaminated water. This is what foreign companies have been doing to our land. This is what they leave for our children while they take our gold. And when confronted, they don't deny their actions, they simply threaten us with poverty if we object. Traore's voice grew more passionate. They believe we will choose economic dependency over dignity. They believe we fear their power more than we love our country. They are wrong. He outlined his plan: environmental remediation of affected areas, funded by seized assets from Golden Mountain, temporary nationalization of the mines until responsible partners could be found, emergency economic measures to support laid-off workers, and a call for African solidarity against exploitative practices. To those who would threaten our sovereignty, Burkina Faso is not for sale. To those who spread lies about corruption, transparency is our unswerving action we take, will be documented and publicly accessible. And to our own people, I ask for your patience and solidarity during difficult days ahead. Freedom has never been free. As the broadcast ended, reports came in of spontaneous demonstrations of support in major cities. The public, it seemed, was rallying behind their president's defiance. But in the presidential palace, Traore's Security Council painted a more complex picture. The markets are in free fall, reported Economy Minister Ouedraogo. The CFA franc has lost 25% of its value overnight. Fuel prices are spiking as traders fear sanctions. The French have recalled their ambassador for consultations, added Foreign Minister Diallo. The American response has been measured. They're calling for dialogue, but have not taken a position. Defense Minister Koulibaly provided the most alarming update. We've intercepted communications suggesting a possible coup attempt. Several mid-level officers have been meeting secretly with foreign military attachés. Traore absorbed the information calmly. Names? We're still investigating, sir. But the circle around General Diendere seems particularly active. Traore nodded grimly. General Gilbert Diendere, a longtime power broker and former head of the Presidential Guard, had been marginalized under Traore's leadership. His connections to French intelligence were an open secret. Place him under house arrest, Traore ordered, discreetly, and rotate the command of all major military units. No commander stays in place for more than 48 hours until this crisis passes. As the council debated further security measures, Fatima Ouedraogo, his chief of staff, entered with an unexpected message. Mr. President, President Adesina of Nigeria is on a secure line. He says it's urgent. Traore took the call in his private office. Adesina, leader of Africa's most populous nation and its largest economy, was a respected voice in regional politics. President Traore. Adesina's deep voice carried the weight of his nation's influence. I've been following the situation in Burkina Faso with concern. Thank you for your interest, Mr. President. Traore replied cautiously, unsure whether Nigeria would stand with him or pressure him to compromise. Let me be direct, Adesina continued. What Golden Mountain has done is unacceptable, but their backers are powerful, and Burkina Faso cannot stand alone against such forces. Traore's heart sank. Another call for pragmatism that would leave his people's water poisoned. But Adesina surprised him. That is why Nigeria will stand with you. I've instructed our central bank to extend a stabilization loan of $1 billion to support your currency. Our environmental experts are preparing to assist with water remediation. And I've spoken with President Akufo-Addo of Ghana, and President Bazoum of Niger. They too will offer support. Traore was momentarily speechless. Mr. President, I don't know what to say. Say nothing. Just listen, Adesina replied. This is not charity. This is African solidarity. For too long, we have allowed outside powers to play us against each other while they extract our wealth. If they can isolate Burkina Faso today, they will target Ghana tomorrow, Niger next month, Nigeria next year. We see your struggle as our own. The conversation continued, covering practical details of the support package and diplomatic coordination. By the time it concluded, Traore felt his determination renewed. With regional allies, Burkina Faso's position was significantly strengthened. The next morning brought both challenges and opportunities. As expected, General Diendere's arrest had triggered unrest among certain military factions. 2 barracks, on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, reported insubordination, with officers refusing orders from the central command. Simultaneously, Golden Mountain's parent company in Beijing issued a surprising statement. They expressed deep concern about the allegations, announced an internal investigation, and proposed a joint remediation committee with the Burkina government to address any environmental issues while operations remain suspended. Traore recognized the statement for what it was, a tactical retreat to buy time while maintaining their assets, but it also represented leverage. With Nigeria's financial backing and growing Pan-African support, he could negotiate from a position of strength. The problem of military loyalty, however, remained acute. After consulting with Ouedraogo, Traore made a bold decision. He would personally visit the dissenting barracks. It's too dangerous, Ouedraogo objected. If there are coup plotters there, Then better to confront them directly than wait for them to come to me, Traore replied. As a former military officer himself, he understood the barracks mentality. Soldiers respected courage and direct communication. That afternoon, with minimal security, Traore walked into the main courtyard of the Camboinse barracks, where 300 soldiers had assembled. The tension was palpable as he climbed onto a simple wooden platform. "I've heard there are men here who question my orders," he began, his voice carrying across the silent yard. "Men who may have been told I am betraying our country by standing up to foreign interests.